What happens when officers target a man they assume is powerless only to discover he holds their fate in his hands? The truth will leave you speechless the humid afternoon. In Jackson Heights felt like a heavy blanket wrapping the streets in its sticky grip. Marcus Porter, always uncollected, stepped out of a modest diner. Carrying an neatly packed brown paper bag, his sharp navy suit and polished shoes stood out against the chaotic tumult of the city, a man clearly out to handle business. But first, there had other priorities outside the diner's lumped against the wall. Satan, older homeless veteran, his hollow eye scanned the busy street, filled with faces that refused to acknowledge him. Marcus, however, stopped. "Here you go," handing over the warm meal. The man stared him for a moment, surprised. "Thank you." "God bless you," the veteran muttered, his voice shaky but sincere. Marcus nodded, offering a small smile. Those moments mattered to him. They were simple but powerful. Across the street, this sleek black Jeep Grand Cherokee waited like a beacon of success. However, it wasn't just Marcus who noticed it. Carter and Doyle, two patrol off. Isa sparked nearby, leaned against their cruiser, watching him with smug expressions. Carter, a wiry man with a face permanently twisted into a sneer, nudged his partner. "Look, that be this rid stolen." Doyle, stocky and always eager to follow Carter's lead, chuckled. "Let's have a little fun." But they'll fold in a mute, unaware of the brewing storm. Marcus walked toward his car, opened the door, and carefully placed his leather briefcase inside, his mind already on the rest of his day. But before he could even shut the door, the officers descended. "Hands where I can see thee." Carter's voice was sharp and hostile, slicing through the noise of the street. Marcus froze, confusion flashing across his face. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting theirs. "Is there a problem, officers?" She's steady, thought the tension was undeniable. Doyle stepped forward, his hand resting near his belt. "This your cargo?" "Proof of that." Marcus inhaled deeply, keeping his voice even. "Yes, it's my car. My registration and license are in the glove." Before he could finish, Carter grabbed his arm roughly. "Don't move. We'll check for ourselves." Marcus stiffened, his sharp minder already noting every detail, their badges, their demeanor, the small crowd beginning to form, and the smartphones raised to record Carter and Doyle, and sacked the car without hesitation to sing papers, sunglasses, and Marcus's neatly folded work gloves onto the pavement. The crowd murmured in disbelief. "Yeah, that's foul, teenager," whispered, his phone camera steady. "They're just messing with him." Marcus's voice calm but firm. "Officers, you're violating my rights. You haven't done anything wrong." Carter turned, his sneer deepening. "Shut it, you people. Think you're untouchable." Marcus's calm almost faltered. "You people." The phrase hung in the air, sharp and ugly, and Marcus felt a cracking his composure. But they didn't react, not yet. Then came the vandalism. Carter, clearly enjoying the display, pulled out his baton. With a heat-treacle swing, has smashed the taillight of Marcus's Jeeps, sending shards of glass scattering across the pavement. The crowd gasped, the murmurs growing louder. Doyle grinned and grabbed a crowbar from their cruiser. With a loud echoing thud, he dented the hood. The crowd's disbelief turned to outrages to pit. Someone yelled, "Hadn't do anything." But the officers didn't stop. They laughed as they continued their so-called inspection. Marcus stood, motionless, his fists clenched at his sides. The anger in him burned hot, but hadn't act on. If it couldn't, not yet. Inside, his thoughts raced. This wasn't just abuse of power. It was a deliberate show-up performance meant to humiliate. And Marcus knew every second was being captured on the phone surrounding him. The destruction continued with an almost theatrical flair, as if Carter and Doyle were auditioning for the role of most corrupt cop. Marcus's sleek black Jeep now looked like it had been through a demolition derby, and lost glass sparkled on the pavement. The hood was dented beyond recognition, and papers from his glove compartment littered the sidewalk like confetti. After a parody, the officers laughing like it was the best entertainment they'd had all week. "Guess he'll think twice before showing off next time." Doyle muttered, his grin stretching to where Asher leaned casually on the crowbar. Marcus stood still, his arms crossed, his face unreadable to the untrained eye. He might have looked calm, but inside he was a volcano waiting to erupt. Every second of this humiliation was fuel. The crowd could feel it too. They weren't just watching, they were recording, narrating, and sharing. Phones were raised, capturing every swing of the baton and every smirk from Carter and Doyle. Within minutes, the hashtags #Justice for Marcus and #Police Brutality started trending online. The growing crowd mewed and shouted their disapproval, their voices rising above the officer laughter. Strangers arrived, drawn by the viral posts, their faces filled with outrages. Suddenly, a police cruiser rolled up. The laughter stopped. Outstepped Sergeant Reynolds, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and the kind of presence that demanded attention. His brow furrowed as she took in the scene. The smashed taillights, the dented hood, the scattered papers, and Marcus standing tall amidst it all. "What the hell is going on here?" Reynolds barked, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. Carter, whose confidence wavered just slightly, tried to play it cool. He shrugged his usual smirk, faltering, "Just checking a suspicious vehicles." Reynolds' eyes narrowed. She scanned the damage. A suspicious vehicle here, repeated his voice dripping with disbelief. His gaze shifted to Marcus, and then to the crowd of onlookers, many still recording, and what the probable cause for this inspection. Carter opened his mouth, but now words came out. Doyle shuffled awkwardly, suddenly very interested in the toss of his boots before they could conjure an excuse. Marcus stepped forward. His voice was calm, but the stealing hint was unmistakable. "I'd like to lodge a formal complaint." Marcus said, his words slicing through the tension like a razor. "This is harassment, vandalism, and abuse of power." Reynolds stiffened his eyes, darting back to the crowd, where whispers were quickly turning into shouts. The sergeant knew the weight of public perception, and this situation was spiraling out of control. Hedges stirred for Carter and Doyle to step aside. "We'll handle this back at the station," he said, his tone carrying an edge of warning. But Marcus wasn't finished, not by a long shot. "Oh, we will," Marcus replied, his voice steady and deliberate. He stepped closer to Reynolds, his eyes locking onto the sergeant's with unflinching resolve. "But first, I think you should know who I'm." Reynolds' frown deepened. "And who are you exactly?" hesked, his tone a mix of suspicion and confusion. Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his blazer, pulling out a sleek leather badge holder. With a flick of his wrist, he opened it, revealing a badge and ID that glinted in the sunlight. The letters Internal Affairs Bureau were impossible to miss. The crowd gasped. Headphones zoomed in on the badge, and the whisper stirred into a Reynolds' face went pale. Carter and Doyle froze, their smugness draining in an instant. Doyle's grip on the crowbars slackened, and it clattered to the ground with a hollow thud. "I'm Marcus Porter," he said, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the street state inspector for the Internal Affairs Bureau. "And today was your lucky day until about 5 minutes ago." The air grew thick with tea. Nenshin, as Reynolds stared at the badge, his mind racing, he glanced at the crowd. The cameras and the shattered remnants of Marcus's Jeep. Carter and Doyle, usually so quick with their arrogance, stood motionless, their faces setched with panic. The atmosphere shifted in an instant. Carter and Doyle stood frozen, their arrogance replaced by sheer panic. Carter stammered, "What we didn't know." Mark cut them off, his voice sharp. "Didn't know what? That I wasn't just another black many you could humiliate without consequence, or that you'd actually be held accountable." The crowd are you. Tedding cheers, their phones capturing every second. Carter's mouth opened again, but Marcus's glare silenced him. Sergeant Reynolds stepped forward, raising his hands. "Mr. Porter, let's handle this internally. No need to escalate." Marcus's voice cut through him like a blade. "Escalate? Your officers did that when they turned my car into a wreck for sport. Now you're going to see what accountability really looks like." Before Reynolds could respond, additional vehicles pulled up this time. It was Internal Affairs. 3 plain-clothes officers stepped out, their presence silencing the street. The lead officer worsted, "No, him, Carter, Doyle, hands behind your backs." The crowd roared with approval as the 2 officers were cuffed, their humiliation on full display. Phones zoomed in on their faces, now flushed with embarrassment. Doyle muttered something under his breath, but none cared as Marcus's Jeep was towed away. He turned to the crowd, his voice calm but commanding. "This isn't just about me. This is about every person mistreated by those as sworn to protect them. Change doesn't start in boardrooms or speeches, it starts here, and it starts now." The crowd erupted again, chanting his name. The final blow came when Marcus addressed Reynolds directly. "Oh, and one more thing. I wasn't just passing through today. I'm here to evaluate your precinct's compliance with anti-discrimination policies. Congratulations. You failed by the next morning." The precinct was under investigation, and Carter, Doyle, and Reynolds were suspended. Marcus, now a symbol of justice, stood in his driveway staring at this wrecked Jeep. His teenagers on approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Proud of you, Dad," he said softly. Marcus smiled. The fight wasn't over, but this victory was a step forward, and that was enough. For now the energy on the street shifted instantly. Carter and Doyle, who had been so confident, Mensagano, stood frozen, their faces pale. Carter stammered, "We didn't know." Marcus stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "Didn't know what? That I wasn't just another black many you could harass for fun, or that there'd be consequences for your actions." The crowd erupted in cheers, phones capturing every second. Carter's mouth opened again, but Marcus's sharp glare silenced him. Sergeant Reynolds stepped forward, raising his hands. "Miss Porter, let's handle this internally. No need to escalate." Marcus's voice turned. "As I escalate, your officers did that to when they destroyed my car for sport. Now you'll see what accountability looks like." Before Reynolds could respond, unmarked vehicles pulled up. Internal Affairs officers stepped out, their presence shifting the balance completely. Their leader didn't waste time. "Carter, Doyle, hands behind your backs." The crowd cheered louder as the officers were cuffed, their humiliation on full display. Phones zoomed in, catching every detail. Carter glanced at Marcus as if to plead, but Marcus didn't flinch. The tow truck hooked up. Marcus's wrecked Jeep head dressed the crow. "This isn't just about me, it's about everyone who's been mistreated by those who sworn to protect them." Changes start sheer, and it starts now. The final blow came when Marcus turned to Reynolds. "Oh, and one more thing, I'm here to evaluate your precinct's compliance with anti-discrimination policies." "Congratulations, you failed." Reynolds' face turned. Ashen had tried to respond, but Marcus had already turned away. There was nothing left to say by the next morning. The precinct was under investigation. Carter, Doyle, and Reynolds faced suspensions, their names in every headline. Inner Marcus's story went viral, his calm but powerful stance inspiring many that evening. Marcus stood in his driveway, staring at this damaged Jeep. His teenagers on approach, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Proud of you, Dad," he said softly. Marcus smiled. The fight wasn't over, but today he'd taken a step toward real change, and that was in you.